has been helping us in doing this research, because we have very important man here, José Miguel Insulza, who is the OAS Secretary General. And let me tell you that he is making a great effort to be with us today. He's been flying over the last 44 hours all over the continent. And I'm very pleased to have him here. He happens to be a very good scholar. I met him. I'm not going to tell how many years ago. This is not the right time to do that. But let me tell you, he is a very, very keen scholar. He was in charge of the United States Studies Institute at CIDE, one of the very few and the first research areas in Latin America specialized in trying to know what's going on in this country. And he is also a political leader, a diplomat. I could say he's a doer, and a scholar, that kind of people who makes things happen. He is very good in forging deals where we could expect tensions. And I think he's the right man today to talk about inter-American relations. We see this is a critical time for our hemisphere. It looks kind of fragmented, or some people would say plural. We came from 5 very good years in terms of economic growth and democratic stability, but the economic crisis is here, and many people is asking about the risk of protectionism, of anti-Americanism, and maybe that could create a difficult climate for cooperation in the hemisphere. Well, having said that, you have the long civic history here of José Miguel Insulza. I'm going to give him the microphone, so we're waiting for your comments. José Miguel, very welcome.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and with a dear friend such as Guadalupe Gonzalez, she has remembered we met some time ago when we both worked at CIDE. I was just going to make one. I wanted to say times. I wanted to speak about years, but I do very much remember distinctly some years ago when my friend Luis Mayra, who was actually our ambassador the Chilean ambassador to Buenos Aires, and he was the creator of this Institute of U.S. Studies, and he invited me to a seminar, to some meeting in there, and said you're going to have presentations. Olga Pellicer is going to be there, and there is, he said, I remember that like today, this brilliant young lady whom you have to know because she's really a jewel in this matter of international relations. And guess who that was? That was Walu. And she's still very young and she's still very brilliant. So I'm very glad to be here with her. And I think that she has done an excellent job, by the way. We have I think we have some tradition in the Americas, in Latin America, of comparative foreign policies. We have had some important studies in which the policies of countries are compared in terms of what they do, in terms of their actual policies. I remember the collection our friend Heraldo Muñoz published in the 80s, and with a yearly book with all kinds with studies on each of the countries and their foreign policies and trying to compare them. But what we didn't have is something in which there is a tradition in the U.S. of studying political attitudes with regards to foreign policy. I remember very much the Council of the Americas had some kind of a study several years ago on America and the world, which revealed to be a very important tool for us who studied U.S. foreign policy in those years. And in those years, I remember one of the words I learned from this study of America and the world was the word intermestic policies, which refer to the moment in which international policies came into the domestic agenda, and especially in times of crisis. That was happening in those days. In the case of Vietnam, those were the first years of those studies coincided with the war in Vietnam, and it has happened on and off again, and happened until recently, in which the main agenda topic of the U.S. was Iraq. It's not now. It's a crisis. So this is not doesn't happen always, but in domestic policies is always there. The interesting thing about looking at things from the other side of the world, in this case from Latin America, how this turns around. It's actually not the opinions on if the opinions on local politics or national politics can be influenced by what's going on in the world, it can also be the other way around. And most of the opinions we see in this survey, or many of the opinions we see in this survey, are very much influenced by what happens in one's own country with the problems we have. And that's only natural in countries which are not the center of the policies of the world, but rather have some secondary position in the international affairs. They tend to look at the problems as the problems in which they are involved, really. It's very interesting to compare these results in this sense on what are the threats, global threats, what are global threats to Latin Americans with local polls. Local polls. If you read polls in all the region, there are two issues that appear always, which are crime and poverty. And actually, in the term poverty sometimes appears as jobs, other times it appears as inequality, etc. But it's basically that syndrome that's really active. And the other one is crime. Until about a couple of years ago, the issue was crime. The economy was going better. Now the economy is going worse, and the issue is poverty, or jobs, or unemployment. Or 6 months ago, this was reflected in the problems of food prices and lack of food. So the first thing I would like to say is that the priorities, the main threats on foreign policy in this survey are the main, that come from abroad in this survey, are the same threats and problems that people see in their own countries, are their concerns in their own countries. And to that sense, I would say that our citizens still don't seem to have their own, a foreign policy agenda. Believe me, there's a lot of discussion in Latin America on foreign policy. There's a lot of discussion of what's going on in the world. But when you ask them what do you think are the main threats for this country, one would say that what you see from the answers is the main threats are already here. They are drug traffic, organized crime, global warming, poverty, food, AIDS. The problems that people will say threaten them in their own countries. I remember very well the last poll I had a chance to see in my country before coming to the OAS, and it was a poll on precisely the question: what do you think threatens you most? And in big Santiago de Chile, and the people said the drug traffickers dealing in the corners. That was their main concern. Well, probably you ask them when they ask those same ladies or men the question on foreign policy in this poll, the answer was the same. What threat the main? So that's one first thing I would like to say. This is in spite of the fact that the poll shows not only that Latin Americans are, but that they feel very much connected to the world. After all, that's the issue of remittances, and there's the issue of migration, which is very high. By the way, just to show how much Latin America has changed, the low which is commented in the study as a low rate of Chileans who says that they have some relative living abroad, which is 35%. I remember very well the first time I went to school many, many years ago, and I got home and I told my father, the other guy, the guy sitting on the bench next to me, says his parents came from Spain. I had never imagined that the parents of somebody could come from some other place. And now it's only natural. The lowest number of people living abroad is Chileans, and Chileans have 35%, and that's only natural because we have 4 times as many foreigners, Chileans living outside of the country, than foreigners living in Chile. So that's a big change. But in spite of these remittances, and in spite of this immigration, and in spite of the fact that our exports have grown so much, and in spite of the Mercosur and the OAS and the free trade agreement, because I want to remind you that of these countries, all of these countries in the survey have signed free trade agreements with the United States. One has not been approved yet, has not been voted, but they all have signed free trade agreements. In spite of all that, the people don't seem to have a real agenda of their own in matters of foreign policy. But they do have some things which are very interesting. And one is, of course, this will we have to check with when the survey extends to some other countries that do not have free trade agreements with the U.S. I won't say that we wouldn't like to have them, because I will comment that later, but do not have and do not expect them in those countries in which attitudes, in which politics is very different from Chile, Peru, Mexico, Colombia. If you confront them with that, I don't know how fragmented the agenda will seem. My impression is that we'll have to have some degree of differences, and not the ones exactly the ones we think of, but some more degree of difference. I note, in spite of the difference presented in this study, I note several regularities, and one will go exactly more or less in the direction I'm talking about, which is like a defensive attitude towards the world. And first, we are going to be more important in 10 years from now. My country is going to be more important 10 years from now. But the world today is worse than it was 10 years ago, and it will be even worse 10 years from now. And that's a not very positive view of the world, which can only be, of course, which can probably explain some of the reasons why foreigners that don't have a big rating in our countries. This is not exactly there, but all polls show that there's a general attitude of mistrust against it that are foreign. Not that much as there might have been before, but it still persists. So we want our country to be more engaged in the world. That question is answered positively. But at the same time, we have a certain mistrust against the world, or a negative vision of the world. And sometimes I will also say, to a certain extent, that people would like to have things done by somebody else. And the best question about this is the one if you have an armed conflict, who would you refer to? Well, some see the United Nations, others, many less, say the OAS. I would probably say the United Nations, because the OAS doesn't get involved in internal conflicts. But I would say anyway, most of the answers are located in that area, and then the possibility of other countries intervening. There's some difference in the case of Chile, in which they say the OAS or other countries of the region. I suspect that's when the poll was taken, when our president had taken a leadership role in in the problem of Bolivia with the UNASUR, and the UNASUR was very, very popular and very important in Chile at that moment, in that precise moment. But in general, you can say that people would, I mean, they want to get involved. They understand that they are much more involved in the world than before. They have a certain negative view of the world. They tend to prefer your country not getting too involved, but others to get involved. I can't not say that, recognizing Ambassador Carolina Barco there. I remember once, because this is not only of the public opinion, it's also the leaders. And I remember when we had a very important meeting of the Rio Group in Buenos Aires, in Bariloche, and she made a brilliant presentation on the situation in Colombia, which convinced the presidents to issue a statement supporting the Colombian government and asking every country to get involved, not only the OAS, but every country to get involved in the mission, the peace mission in Colombia. So I went back to the OAS, and this was discussed at the meeting. And of course, getting involved means putting money in the thing. I mean, sending people. And very frankly, and I'm not going to identify him, but one of the ambassadors said, "I think that the first thing we should do, Mr. Secretary General, is form a group to go to Europe and ask for resources for this." And I told them, "Look, I mean, the Europeans are already putting the resources what they are expecting is to see if that in a small quantity, in a modest way, we also put our resources into that," which eventually happened, by the way. I'm not saying it didn't happen. But the general attitude is get more involved. The world doesn't trust you really that much. And at the same time, we want the world to help us in our problems. But at the same time, many times we are still not willing to do it. And that has a lot to do with the attitudes towards some of the important things we should be dealing with. One of them is integration. I mean, the problems of integration in Latin America don't have to do with the willingness to have integration. They don't have to do with the actual speeches we make. They don't know with actual declarations, statements we make. They have to do with some very concrete things which are supranational policies. I mean, decision making at the integration level or not at the country level. Conflict resolution. We don't have mechanisms to decide on trade matters above the countries. We don't have mechanisms to arbitrate problems among the countries, and they have to do with who pays for the costs of integration. And that, I think, is very much supported in an attitude we still have in our population, and of course in our politicians, because since I think that democracy has progressed very highly in Latin America. There's never been in spite of all the problems we have, we must admit that there has never been a more democratic period than today in Latin America. And of course, leaders tend to follow what people are saying. And people want to keep the country a little bit separated from the rest of the world, even though they think that the world is very important. And I think that's a very important, and that reflects itself in attitudes towards integration, and it also reflects itself in the pervasive, in the presence of still some very, I would say, minor conflicts at the scale of what the world is today, minor conflicts among countries which go for centuries without being solved. I think that it's also very, very important to refer, and I know that you have been talking about this, but in the past panel that somebody told me when I was arriving, but I would like to say something about the Latin America and the U.S. and the feelings of Latin Americans with regard to the U.S. And I'm not going to be only referring here to this survey, also to some others that I have read on the matter. I mean, everybody thinks that the majority of people think that the U.S. is important for Latin America. That's a fact. No one would dream of saying that we should turn our backs to the United States. On the contrary, I've read another survey I think it was the Latino Barometer survey that asked the people, who do you want to have a free trade agreement with? And everybody said with the U.S., except the Venezuelans, who said with China, and second with the U.S. All the others said the U.S. And most of them said China, and the second place also, by the way. But if we are going to talk about, and so there we want to be, this document says it very clearly, everybody wants to be a partner with the U.S. Now, how much can we trust the U.S.? I don't think that an attitude of not so much trust is a bad attitude, because after all, the difference in size are so large. If you have an elephant in the room, you will want to be to associate yourself to it. But at the same time, you will always be thinking, maybe he's not going to care that much about me. Maybe he's not going to worry that much about me. Maybe I should be careful with him. I always, as I said it when I commented the Marta Lagos poll, I said I think it's a healthy attitude. We want to be partners with the U.S., but the U.S. has a lot to do in terms of gaining our trust. And not only, I'm not talking trust in the sense that we are going to be betrayed, but that we are going to be left aside when another problem arises, and that has happened recently. So it's only natural that people tend to say, no, I mean, we want to be partners, we want to work together, we need a good relationship. After all, if you ask most of the Latin Americans, I would probably exclude the Southern Cone, but most of the Latin Americans, to which country would you like to migrate? They will all say they would like to migrate to the U.S. Probably the guys in the deep south would have Europe as a first choice. But so we would like to live there. We want to be partners. We think that they are completely necessary. We would like to have free trade with them. But I mean, we have to be careful. We have to be. This is not a full-fledged love affair. It's going to be always something which is natural when you have a world leader and regional powers. I think what's going on today with the U.S. and Brazil, which will probably extend also to Mexico, of working together in other world affairs which are not the affairs of the region, is something that had never happened before. I mean, when the U.S. has a problem in Asia, he discusses with the ASEAN, and with NATO. When he has a problem with Latin, in some region, he goes to the main alliances. There has never been a discussion of world problems between the U.S. and Latin America. Never. Only of regional problems and on a very local nature. I recall, for example, that the President George Bush, the father's initiative on the Americas, which was very important and opened the way, really opened the way to the discussion on free trade and all that, was born as an initiative of a meeting of ministers of the economy because the Uruguay round was bogged down. So that proves that it can be done. We can discuss world problems together, but it's not done very often, and probably it's done only in times of deep crisis, of big crisis. You need the Latin Americans and the Caribbean to disentangle the Uruguay round, and then you discuss the issues. So I think that it's a natural situation, and I think it will last as long as one country is 76% of the GNP of the region. 76% of the GNP of the region. I mean, all the countries which the U.S. says that it has problems in Latin America amount to about 2% of U.S. GNP. And while that difference exists, of course, we will have this kind of lacks of trust and problems. And I think that's only a natural matter which we shouldn't be concerned about. And let's not make a mistake. It doesn't depend necessarily on one administration. I understand that today the situation is much better, and probably the President of the United States is one of the most popular persons one of the most popular politicians in Latin America, much more popular than many and than most of our own politicians, which doesn't mean that this basic situation will change, because it's only natural in countries which are so different and so different sizes and wealth as you have the U.S. and the rest of the Latin Americas. I think that, of course, in the issue of integration, and I'm going to close with this, I guess, we have to be concerned, of course, of the negative attitude towards foreigners. I don't think it's that deep. Probably it is deeper as a poll shows in the case of two countries included in the poll, is deeper among neighbors than in the region as a whole, because of the reminiscences of many of all problems. I think that the problem is to be concerned because we're having a crisis, and the trend to protectionism, of course, can be fueled by this kind of attitudes. However, I tend to see, and I've been around the region in the past months, I don't tend to see in general trends to closing the borders. The reason is that Latin Americans know that their country lives of exports in general. I mean, Latin American growth in the past 7-8 years was export-led. And we know that if we begin closing borders, we risk not exporting our copper, our soybeans, and our oil and our gas, etc. And I think that's entrenched in people's minds. I know that in general people know. I mean, we have always been very much criticized for being a big commodity or exporters of very few commodities, of some commodities. Naturally, people believe that, think of that. They know that if they start trying to, probably you'll have some problems. Some countries will try to overcome their balance of payments problems or their internal budget problems with applying tariffs to one or two products, but it will never be a different situation. I wanted to say that from my point of view, just to conclude, what we have to try to work out in the case of the U.S., I'll go back to that, because we have the Summit of the Americas very soon, and I've been saying this all over, and I want to say it here also. I think that there's a basic promise that the President of the U.S. made a few months ago in a foreign policy speech, in which he said, I don't want to have a policy for you, I want to have a policy with you. And that at least stuck in my mind, and I know of several other people in the Americas. You see, this is not a problem of agenda. We know what the agenda is, and it's there. It's the problems that people mention. It's drug traffic, it's migration, it's energy, it's oil, it's global warming, it's crime. We know the issues. It's trade. Trade continues to be an issue. We know the issues. The problem is that we don't have common policies on these issues. Mexicans sit. I mean, not the Mexican government. I know they do a lot of things, but the Mexican citizen sits there to see what the U.S. is going to do with migration, and they like that or they don't like it, but they don't participate in setting that, and they know that they are not having that they are having nothing to do with the actual decisions on the policy, and probably the same things happen to other countries with other issues. The U.S. has always had an agenda for Latin America, or a proposal for Latin America. It hasn't had an agenda with Latin America. And I think that should change. I think that the more the Latin Americans get involved really in decision-making in the world, the more they really participate in world affairs. I'm very glad, for example, with the fact that Mexico is participating in the UN Security Council. That should change some attitudes. It has changed them. Let me tell you, it has changed this in a clear way in countries which have done that. Attitudes towards the world do change when people get involved. You go to a country as Uruguay, for example, you talk about foreign policy today, and the views of foreign policy are very different. They are the country that has the highest per capita participation in peace missions in the world. Almost half of the Uruguayan armed forces have been in peace missions. The more we participate, these attitudes are going to change. For the moment, I tend to see them more as a reflection of local policies and of local politics, or as this kind of domestic policy, the other way around. I don't know how to call it. I don't know. And that's going to last as Latin America continues to be a little peripheral in decision-making in world affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose Miguel, for being so frank and blunt in showing all the spots in our face. And he's willing to take a few questions. We only have very little minutes left because we have to move from this room. So I think if there is any question from you, we're going to take just two. Any question from the audience?
Or rebuttals. Somebody wants to say something different.
Everybody agrees with you. That's
John
you are the best Secretary General I have ever met.
He wants to say something.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No questions. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta?
¿No?
¿O tú quieres preguntar algo? No.
Well, just okay. No, please do.
Mr. Secretary General, let's try to draw you out a little bit more on the Summit of the Americas. You are absolutely right about what President Obama has stated, and I think that represents the view that we are seeing right now as the United States involves itself in diplomacy preparing for the summit. My question is this: is Latin America and the Caribbean prepared to say yes? Because the question comes to mind is, what Latin America are we talking about here? What is going to be the response to a proposal by the United States to say yes to multilateralism that's relevant and means something, that makes the OAS something other than a place where a lot of opinions are heard, but when it comes to action, there isn't very much. Even you said that in terms of a real problem, take it to the United Nations in terms of an internal problem. But the OAS is capable of doing so much more. I think everybody here believes that. And it has done so much in human rights. It has done so much kind of under the radar. But is the hemisphere going to be prepared to say yes to President Obama?
Well, yes, I think that I should clarify one thing. I was talking about the question of Walu's question in the poll is of armed conflict. I have to remind you that the last time that the OAS got involved in armed conflict was in Santo Domingo in the middle of the 60s, and that was with a peace mission, which is not very well remembered. So I would hesitate to have the OAS involve itself in some kind of armed conflict in the Americas. I must admit that. But aside from that, no, I think that it should get involved in everything. I should basically that armed problems in which fortunately we don't have at the scale of other regions are usually a matter for the UN Security Council. And I want to have my own. I would like the Fuerza Interamericana de Paz was something that, at least to me, brings bad memories. I must admit that. I am very much, as you know, and this is not new to you or to anybody. I'm very much against any form of armed intervention in the Americas, under any pretext, of course. And if it ever had to happen, I would rather take it for the international community as a whole. I agree that, after all, we have that today and in a very good way in Haiti, and those are forces of the United Nations, and we deal with them very well. The OAS is a part of them. When they meet, we meet with them, but it's not a force that depends from the OAS. And that's in the situation of. I mean, we should have we should improve very much the situation of trust in the Americas before we can deal with those matters. But in general, I think that the countries of the region are willing to engage more multilaterally, of course, in a common agenda, provided that we all agree in with the things that we're going to do multilaterally. The problem which we cannot have is a unilateral setting of the agenda and the multilateral implementation of the agenda. If we have a multilateral setting of the agenda, we would probably be willing to have a multilateral implementation. I know that and I think that this is the attitude that's going to prevail in the summit. I think that, just to go more into the problems, I think that the attitude that's going to prevail in the summit is give the President of the U.S. the possibility of developing his policy. Don't press him too hard on issues that we all know that he cannot solve today. But of course, that's not going to be everybody's attitude. Some are going to say there is going to be some posturing. There are going to be some speeches. But I do hope that I do know that good sense will prevail, and we're going to have a summit in which many things are going to be said, but no unreasonable demands are going to be made.
Okay. I think we have run out of time. Well, one was last question, please.
El último. Sí, voy a tener poco tiempo.
No, lo que pasa es que tenemos que dejar el lugar porque
Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. I have a question on the summit process. Mr. Secretary General, I'd like to know your advice on how, if and how to continue this process. This will be the 5th summit. I think the 6th if we count the one extraordinary summit that I think happened in Mexico. I don't see any country present itself as a candidate to hold the next one. So in your view, should it continue? And if so, how to do it?
Well, I think that, thank you for the question. I would like very much to give my opinion very clearly. I think that in the years of presidential politics and summitry, it would be hard to say the only institution that's not going to have a summit is the hemispheric institutions. But I think that we have to go to the system that exists in other summits. This must be an OAS summit. The summit should be organized by the Organization of American States every 2 or every 3 years. That's not for me. It's not the big point. And it should probably take the place of the assembly that year, of the General Assembly that year. So what I would do if I had a choice, of course, it's going to be decided by the presidents and the ministers, is instead of the present summit, with all these preparatory meetings that have taken around 6 months to discuss until the last detail of the declaration and all that, can every 3 years or every 2 years be replaced by a summit as part of the normal mechanism of the Organization of American States? And of course, as in our assemblies also, the rest of the Inter-American organizations should also take part, should participate. That would make it much easier and give the summit less this feeling of expectation. I mean, what is going to happen? What's this president going to say? What are they going to ask? And say, no, they meet every 2 or 3 years in a normal way, in a normal fashion, and I'm sure that we will have places to hold the summit, because we have places to hold the assembly. The problem with the Summit of the Americas is that it seems so big, so enormous, so transcendent, and it's not that really. It's the same. I mean, the OAS ambassadors go, the foreign ministers go, the presidents will go. We should de-dramatize the Summit of the Americas, and the best way of de-dramatizing is to have the OAS, which is the Organization of the American States, to hold it.
Well, thank you very much, Jose Miguel. We really appreciate having you here today, despite your tight schedule. Just a few words on logistics. We have to move to to the other room for the second panel. The good news is that we became very popular, and we have the copies of our print reports are gone. So all of you that would like to have a copy, just write your name and your address in the paper, and we can send them to you through the Woodrow Wilson Center. Anything else?
A note from our sponsors. Thank you again,
Thank
Mr.
you very
Secretary
much.
General. Thank you,
Very
Guadalupe.
much.
We do have to move from this room, and we will be reconvening directly across the hallway in the sixth floor boardroom. Thank you very much for helping us get out and leave the auditorium for the next
Thank you.
tenants. Thank you.